Welcome back to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted as always to be joined by Elliot Grigg, which means we are in preview mode. This one, a massive heavyweight bout in another Riyadh season card in Saudi Arabia, October 12th, Kingdom Arena. One of the standout undercard fights underneath Artur Beterbiev against Dmitry Bivol. But before we get into it, please do like this video, subscribe to the channel, drop us a comment on what you think we're about. What you think of our rest of our content and what we're discussing right now, which is, of course, the Fabio Wardley against Frazer Clarke fight. And before, they've obviously fought before. This is a rematch, Elliot. Massive. It was one of the best fights to happen on British shores, obviously, earlier this year. Cracking contest, ended in a draw. And before we kind of come on to predictions and how maybe the fight could play out here at the weekend in Riyadh, I want to ask you first and foremost, Elliot, after you've told us how you are, is that can either man, Fabio Wardley or Frazer Clarke, go on to win a world heavyweight title?
So thank you very much, Paul, for having me. Thank you very much for that eloquent breakdown as an introduction as usual. Can either man win a heavyweight world title? I mean, for me, I don't know what you think about this, Paul. We'll come to your thoughts in a second, but for me, the answer is no. And I feel like, I don't try to be brutal there on either man. I just feel like there's a real sort of ceiling. And if you look at kind of like the guys that are young, that are in that division, look, obviously Daniel Dubois, what he did recently against Joshua, Jared Anderson, could he beat either of these guys? Yes, I'd probably have him as favourite against these guys as well. So I'm looking at the next generation, maybe that are coming through, and seeing if these guys can kind of mix it with those guys. And the answer for me is no, unfortunately. I think good fighters. I think I wouldn't, to be honest with you, I'd be struggle to see them either one even reach the top five. I know, obviously, rankings aside, I think Wardley's ranked quite high in certain governing bodies, but I really struggle to authentically put them in the top kind of 5, 10 maybe as well. So for me, the answer is no. Paul, what about yourself?
Yeah, a resounding no for me as well, mate. I think as good as both of these fighters are, I think there's a ceiling. It's, as we've mentioned, that's no disgrace at all. Not every fighter that turns over or has a bit of hype around them or whatever is going to be a world champion. Like, you have to be world class to be a world champion, unless you get a favorable vacant title shot or whatever. But the likelihood of either of these winning a world title for me is slim. I think that, I just don't see it happening. I think, could they both, or regardless of what happens on October 12th, could they both go on in the future to fight for a world title? Yeah, probably could. And it probably could happen. But whether or not they win it is another thing for me, mate. I don't foresee a world in which either Frazer Clarke or Fabio Wardley win a world title. Totally agree with what you've said there, mate. Back to this fight. Before we come on to predictions and stuff, mate, kind of if you're in the corner of Fabio Wardley, tell me what tactics you're telling him to put out on what way to fight against Frazer Clarke this time. And similarly, if you're in Frazer Clarke's corner, what does he have to do differently? Because, I will mention just before you answer that question, it was a draw, but Frazer Clarke had a point deducted for a low blow and was obviously dropped by Fabio Wardley. So you're thinking, Frazer Clarke's thinking, didn't get that point deduction, I won the fight. Fabio Wardley's thinking, if I had just jumped on him a little bit more after that knockdown, I would have won via stoppage. So, you can kind of see an argument for both men, but how does either man win this, and what do they have to change if they are going to win?
Oh, it's a very interesting question, Paul. Thank you for sharing. I think for me, I actually had Fabio Wardley winning the fight, and obviously it was a draw, but for me, he was the winner in my mind. But I think it's tough. I think with Wardley, for me, there's always questions about going the distance and like the general sort of tank. I think, you sort of see him trail off a bit last time, so I'd like to see him possibly pace himself a little bit better. But equally, I feel like he's shown that he's obviously got this sort of this sort of strength to sort of trouble Clarke as well. So I may be talking about maybe sort of bullying him a little bit more, but actually pacing himself throughout the fight. Frazer Clarke's a difficult one for me. Frazer Clarke, I feel like you've got the boxing ability, but you're a better boxer than Fabio Wardley. So for me, it's about pacing himself, Frazer Clarke, pacing himself better to go longer in the fight. But again, I think, to be honest with you, I think there's fewer adjustments needed, really, arguably, for Frazer Clarke than there are for Fabio Wardley. If I'm both men, I'm saying be a bit bolder. I mean, Frazer Clarke especially, I'm saying maybe be a bit bolder, but obviously box smart as well. You've got the ability, but just don't let him essentially pinch rounds and almost don't let him bully you. But if I'm Fabio Wardley, I'm saying you need to sort of bully him essentially and try and back him up and kind of impose your sort of physical attributes on him. So it's just about a bit of boldness, really, but also intelligent boldness and pacing yourself through the fight. What about yourself?
Yeah, mate, for me, Frazer Clarke. See, this is what again, this is the interesting thing about boxing, isn't it? Really, like it was a really close fight. I actually had Frazer Clarke winning it. Again, if he didn't get that point deducted, he would have won it on the scorecards, obviously. So yeah, it's an interesting one in terms of what they have to change. It's weird because I don't think they have to change a whole lot. Like if you're Frazer Clarke, right, you're just kicking yourself because you won that fight if you didn't get a point deducted. So he's just thinking, yeah, I took a few big licks and was even on the deck, but I got up again, came back, won a lot of rounds, won a good few of the late rounds as well. Do you know what I mean? I think he's probably thinking if he's just a little more tidy and doesn't get knocked, a little bit more defensively sound and doesn't land a low blow, like kind of keeps his punches up. Then he's like, well, I can win this fight, and probably he would fancy himself maybe to win it via late stoppage or on points. And then similarly, Fabio Wardley, I think, in my mind, his only way of winning this fight is via knockout, which he can do. He's very much capable of it. He's shown he can hurt Frazer Clarke with those big punches. He had him on the deck. If he can just do that again and replicate that, and maybe not go gung ho and almost like blow himself out jumping on him, but calculated risks where if he does hurt Clarke, little more calculated risk, and then you'll probably be able to close the show. So yeah, that's what I would kind of advise for both. But we're not in any in boxing in the corners or anything for a reason. We're sitting on here on YouTube at home debating this fight, and that's what we prefer to do. So it's prediction time, Elliot. How does this one go for you? The rematch. I actually don't know what you're going to say here. I have a slight inkling of what way you're going to go. But yeah, how does this one go down in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, October 12th? The rematch between Fabio Wardley and Frazer Clarke for the British heavyweight title.
You know what, Paul? This is actually one of the hardest ones we've done. I genuinely believe that. I think I really see it's quite a 50-50 fight. Obviously, it was the first time round. So for me, my heart leans Wardley, but my head actually leans Frazer Clarke, to be perfectly honest with you. I think I do think Wardley's obviously got the attributes to win. I do, but part of me just thinks if Frazer Clarke can keep it together, pace himself through the fight, he's got the better boxing ability, arguably the better pedigree, the better boxing brain. I think he could win a points decision. But equally, having said that, I can see a world where Fabio Wardley wins as well. Look at Frazer Clarke's sort of age as well in comparisons. But I think I'm going to go Clarke, Paul, and I'm going to go points. Are you with me or are you against me?
I am with you, which is strange considering this is a real 50-50. We're both going for the same man. I'm going Frazer Clarke to win this via decision as well. Yeah, and I think it'll be a really close fight. It's not going to be, a resounding, a 10-2 or whatever it'll be in favor of Frazer Clarke. No, not for me. He could even get off the deck again and win on points. I do agree with you, mate. So yeah, an interesting one. But guys, please let us know your thoughts on this fight in the comments. Drop us a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. All of that. We've got you covered with previews, reviews, interviews with fighters, big fight breakdowns, betting tips, you name it, we've got you covered all under one roof on our channel, ESBR Boxing. So please do subscribe. Elliot, thanks very much for joining me, mate, and I will speak to you again next week.
Thank you very much, Paul. And as always, guys, thank you very much for watching.